Helmets on for safety. Welcome to Random, and today we actually have a customer testimonial from today's sponsor, Team Them Damn Nuke Boys Woo. So stick around after the sponsor's ad, and we'll go ahead with today's episode.
Brought to you by Team Them Damn Nuke Boys Woo. Creative fabrications and mods since 1066.
Thank you to our customers for that lovely testimonial from Team Them Damn Nuke Boys Woo. Now, today's episode actually involves a question. Can you leave United States airspace without actually leaving the contiguous 48 states of the United States? And the answer is actually yes. Two of the aircraft we're going to be talking about today actually did it all the time. That's right, we're back here at Hill Aerospace Museum, and we're going to go take a look at some of their displays that should have just opened. So let's get to it. We're going to have to be a little on the quick side. They're about to do a change of command ceremony here in the hangar. What we're staring at here is a useless piece of outdated, obsolete piece of garbage known as the U-2. Now, as I mentioned before, one of my earlier segments, this is one of two aircraft that could technically leave United States airspace without actually leaving the contiguous United States. And what I mean by that is this aircraft is capable of flying in excess of 65,000 feet. Now, the plaque here at the nose of the plane shows an altitude that the aircraft was capable of. That number is wrong. Don't ask how I know. The engine that is equipped in this aircraft, at least this particular variant of the U-2, was capable of an altitude of 73,000 feet. What is currently used in the U-2, which is actually slated to be scrapped in about a year, goes quite a bit higher. I can't tell you how high, but I can tell you it can go higher. Now, what's interesting about this particular aircraft is its wing design, all right? Designed to fly really, really high. Unfortunately, it's also really, really slow. So yes, you can get to really high altitudes and fly there and sustain flight at that altitude, but you're also making yourself a really big target. Now, the U-2, of course, was used primarily for reconnaissance from the 1950s up to today. And like I said, it was pretty much obsolete 4 months after it came out of the factory. Don't believe me? Just ask Francis Gary Powers about that time he turned one into a flaming crater in Russia. That ended well. Now, you'll notice that the U-2 is a bicycle configuration landing gear, and it requires these pogos here on the wingtips. Now, this is just to get it off of the ground. Once it's in flight, it doesn't actually need the pogos simply fall away. But what happens when it lands is it actually has titanium scrub plates on either wingtip, okay? So when it lands on both landing gear and simply tilts over. Under ideal circumstances, the wings no longer generate lift and the aircraft doesn't actually go back into the air. But nobody told one of the trainee pilots at Beale, and when he landed the aircraft, it tacoed the wings and wrecked the entire airframe. And because the Air Force wanted that aircraft to fly again, they ended up spending 80% of the U-2's operational budget for the year on that one plane. And well, when that happens, things tend to go snowball in a bad way. So yeah. Now, this aircraft in this configuration has a Pratt & Whitney engine. The U-2s that are currently in service have General Electric engines. Now, towards the tail of the aircraft, the last 1.5 feet of the skin is actually made of titanium. That's for two reasons. Number one, lots of exhaust, lots of heat coming out of the engine, right? Number two is the vibrations. You know, you've got a lot of thrust coming out of that engine, and it's going to vibrate things quite substantially, and you're going to want something to hold up to that. The big problem with titanium is, number one, really hard to drill. Number two, a little hard to source, particularly in circa 1950s America. We'll get into that a little bit later here in a minute. And number three, you can only drill it out so many times before you have to replace the entire panel. Now, that had to happen a lot on the U-2s, which means they had to recycle their titanium skin quite often. We'll get into that a little bit later with the next aircraft that we're going to talk about, but yeah. Now, I can already hear you in the comments, oh, the U-2 is so extraordinary, oh, it's so revolutionary. No, it's not. All it did was fly really high and really slow, presenting itself as a really nice target for surface-to-air missiles. The only revolutionary thing about this aircraft is actually the avionics systems and the sensors. That's it. You could literally put everything this aircraft could carry on any other aircraft in the air, and it would do exactly the same thing. So yeah, pretty useless aircraft. Although it did actually train up some NASA pilots for their Comet Chaser program, which that aircraft that NASA uses is basically a U-2 in the sense that it flies really, really high, really, really slow, and collects meteor and comet debris that falls through the atmosphere. Now, the U-2 also has an emergency power unit, a one-shot hydrazine-powered turbine to generate air to restart the engine in flight. Of course, when that doesn't work, you end up turning the aircraft into a glider, hoping to actually get back to a safe place to land, provided you don't have a SAM-2 on your tail. Just ask Francis Gary Powers. So yeah, the U-2, the Taylor Swift of aircraft, only good for two things, and basically it's now useless because of satellites. Now over here we have something far more revolutionary and interesting, the SR-71 Blackbird. Now this aircraft is actually really interesting for a number of different reasons, chief among which the J-58 ramjet engines, capable of pushing this aircraft to Mach 3.5. Of course it went faster. You can see an example of it right over there. We'll take a look at that here shortly. Now the SR-71 was actually built primarily out of titanium bought from Russia through CIA shell companies, and you can actually see, at least along the wings here, unfortunately probably not from this angle, but the SR-71 was actually designed with gaps in the panels for the fuel cells. So this thing leaked like a sieve when it was on the ground, but after it got up to speed and up to temperature, more importantly, those gaps sealed and it became watertight, so it could actually hold fuel for the duration of its flight. So that's kind of cool. This thing would actually stretch by up to ½ a foot when it was at operational temperature and operational speed. This thing would travel in excess of Mach 3.5. Yep, that's there. This thing would travel in excess of Mach 3.5 at altitudes in excess of 65,000 feet. Rumor has it this thing went up to 85 or even 95,000 feet, but you didn't hear that from me or anyone that actually flew it. Pretty neat aircraft. Now, the SR-71 did pretty much exactly the same mission parameters and mission profile as the U-2. The biggest difference was this thing flew faster. So where the U-2 was basically a flying target for anyone brave enough to shoot at it, the SR-71 was just simply so fast that nobody could really catch it. So it basically outran SAM missiles. There's more than a few stories of that actually happening. And of course, this was all designed at a time when Lockheed Martin knew what the hell they were doing. And the U-2 is an example of what happens when the gremlins build the aircraft. Piece of crap. Now, what would happen is Kelly Johnson every morning would get together with the engineers, the builders, the maintainers, and the mechanics, and he would sit them down all around a table and they would work out what problems they would have to solve to actually make this thing work and be maintainable. All right. Now, typically at those meetings, they would discuss things like part placement, where they wanted a particular thing, how they were going to access it, how they were going to service it, and basically how they were going to make the aircraft functional and survive and maintainable. They don't do that anymore for some reason. Everything's done on computer, and everything that you need to replace is underneath something you don't need to replace, but has to come out anyway because, hey, you need to replace a fuel pump, or you need to service an oil gallery or something like that. So it's a tremendous pain in the butt. This was built, like I said, this was built at a time when aircraft mechanics and designers, and everybody was working together to make a project and actually function properly. Days gone by, unfortunately. Let's see if we can sneak around. Pause me a moment. Oop, that's the wrong way. Sorry, folks. Over there is the F-22, soon to be on the scrap heap because it's being replaced by the aircraft it was designed to replace. Yeah, that's right. The F-22 is getting replaced by the F-15EX. Now over here we have the J-58 turbojet engine. Now this is actually the core of the SR-71's propulsion system, but what would happen is after Mach 1, this engine would effectively shut down and stop spinning. And what would happen is these panels would actually allow airflow into certain parts of the engine, and air would go around the engine into the afterburner section where it was already pre-compressed by the nose cone here for the engine. You can see it right here. So the nose cone would actually compress the air going into the engine. So you wouldn't actually need the compressor section on the ramjet anymore at that point. All of the air is being compressed, super compressed I should say, by the nose cone, and it would flow around the engine here into the afterburner section, and that's how it would actually make its power. Now again, this aircraft was capable of speeds in excess of Mach 3.5. The truth of the matter is a different story. Now, if you look over here, you can actually see the start cart for the SR-71. That should be, a Buick 425 cubic inch Wildcat motor that's been stroked. All right, so those engines, what they would do, there's a pair of them hooked up to a single drive shaft that would go up to the bottom of the engine for the SR-71. And those engines would turn and turn and turn and turn to get the core of the engine spinning up to speed and actually allow for light off of the engines. So that's kind of cool. They would have one for each engine. Now, the fuel of the SR-71 was actually relatively interesting. It had to burn, but it couldn't explode and it couldn't spontaneously combust in the wings when the aircraft's flying at Mach 3. Well, how would they do that? Number one, they changed the formula of the fuel. So it would only ignite under certain conditions and under certain pressures. And number two, they would actually have liquid nitrogen storage vessels on the SR-71, and the nitrogen would boil off and create gas head pressure inside the fuel cells. So without oxygen being present, the fuel in the wings couldn't auto-ignite. It had to go to the engine to actually burn. So that's kind of cool. Quite literally too. And like I said, this thing leaked like a sieve when it was on the ground. So what they would do is they would have buckets and pans and just other catching devices to try and catch all the residual fuel that leaked out of the aircraft. And what pilots would do in their pressurized suits, ready to get on board the aircraft, what they would do is they would literally put their cigars out in liquid fuel. That's how ridiculous this fuel was. And you can get a better look at the J-58 engine here, made by Pratt & Whitney. What a fantastic design. They don't make them like this anymore, folks. So, like I said, two aircraft capable of leaving United States airspace without actually leaving the contiguous United States. The SR-71 Blackbird and the U-2 POS. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and let these guys do their change of command ceremony. That's it for random. If you got anything out of this, please like, comment, and subscribe down below, and we'll catch you later.